As we get ready for week 13 of the fantasy football season, it's more important than ever to make the right decision at running back. Who do you start and who do you sit? We're about to tell you. We have one last week with a big bye week. There are 6 teams that are off in week 13. That's going to be the Bills, the Ravens, the Vikings, Giants, Raiders, and Bears. Thankfully, there are some running backs you pretty much can set and forget. These are guys we call must starts. Christian McCaffrey, Austin Eckler, Jonathan Taylor, Travis Etienne, Kyron Williams, Alvin Kamara, and Bijan Robinson. Now, before we get to the rest of the running backs, let's remind you one more time that Underdog Fantasy is the place to go. You can do pick'ems, live drafts, everything to get involved in the action outside of your regular fantasy team. And if you are new and you sign up right now, use promo code ENDGAME, you get a 100% deposit match up to $100, and you get a free pick'em here. Dak Prescott on Thursday night only needs 1 yard. You go higher and you combine it with any other pick, and you can triple your wager just like that. So check out Underdog Fantasy if you haven't already. So let's talk about that first matchup. The Seahawks are going to take on the Cowboys, who are just absolutely rolling these days. But let's start on the Seattle side. What do you feel about Zach Charbonnet, who will pretty much be the guy again this week?
Yeah, on the one hand, he'll be the guy. On the other hand, it's Seattle on the road in Dallas. You can't feel good, but he catches passes. He at least has a floor in your PPR league, so I'll say he's a floor play if you need him.
Horrible timing for a guy to finally get his chance to be a starting running back in this schedule, which doesn't get any easier next week. On the road, Dallas. Can't feel great about him, but at the same time, with all these players on bye, he at least is startable. So if you need him in PPR league, you can start him, but not a great start. And then there's Tony Pollard. Look, back-to-back games with pretty good fantasy day, finally scoring touchdowns, but does it continue?
Yeah, not as good of a spot as he's had the last 2 weeks, but Seattle's run defense hasn't been as good as they were earlier in the year. He can always score. They're at home. I think Tony Pollard, especially this week, is still a good start.
Have to agree. At the very least, he's still getting the vast majority of touches in that backfield. That offense is just putting up so many points. Not nearly as good a matchup, like you said, but also still strong RB2. Chargers are going to take on the Patriots in Foxborough. Look, I know Austin Eckler might have been a little bit disappointing, but you still have to start him if you got him. What about Ramondre Stevenson on the other side? He's looking better and better.
Yeah, I think he's pretty close to a must start this week as well. This is a good matchup against the Chargers. He's been great the last 3 games. Zeke, not really doing anything. Ramondre Stevenson is pretty much this entire offense. I think for the most part, if you got him, you're starting him.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic that just as soon as the Patriots' passing offense now looks like the worst in the NFL, at least one of the worst for sure, Ramondre is playing his best. I mean, they have to give him the ball because they have no passing game. I'm going to start him pretty much everywhere I have him against this Chargers defense especially. And I'll tell you what I'm definitely doing. If you look at those pick'ems that I already talked about on Underdog, right now, early in the week, his line is 57.5 rushing yards. That seems really low for a guy who's been playing so well. He's gone over 87 rushing yards in 3 straight games, and this is not a tough run defense. So again, you're looking for another pick to pair with that Dak one. I'm going Ramondre higher than 57.5. I know you agree. This is a great spot for Ramondre. Next up, the Lions going to take on the Saints in the Dome. So, David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery. Are we starting both these guys? Let's start with Monty.
Yeah, I think Monty's still a good start this week. He's got touchdown upside, and technically he was kind of the lead back, kind of sort of pulled away from Gibbs. I know when you look at it overall, it was close, but that's because the Lions were getting blown out. A lot of garbage time, a lot of Jahmyr Gibbs in garbage time. Don't think that's going to happen this week against the Saints, so I think Montgomery this week's still a solid start.
It really seems like a matchup and the venue, even when we talk about Detroit being good at home, it seems to just matter less and less with the Lions. I think Monty is pretty much a guy, I'm closing my eyes and I'm putting in my lineup every week, unless I'm just stacked at running back, but he's just every week a high upside RB2 for me. And then Gibbs, I feel like he's a little more game script dependent, but I mean, he's also still got to be at least a solid starter.
Yeah, given the state with all these teams on bye, given the running back landscape, I think he's certainly still, a starting running back in fantasy. Don't like him nearly as much in this matchup here against the Saints. I don't think it's going to be a game where, the Lions are trailing too much. But the Saints, look, they did not look good against that Falcons running attack. So I think Gibbs also a solid start.
Then we got the Falcons taking on the Jets. Let's talk Breece Hall. What can we expect this week?
2 yards a carry, 6-ish dump offs for another 20 to 30 yards probably. Maybe if you're lucky, Tim Boyle gets them close to the end zone and they score. I mean, like the same thing every week pretty much. I mean, you're starting Breece Hall, but I don't feel nearly as good about him as I have the last few weeks. You really need a touchdown or him to rip off a long run, and both of those feel like asking a lot at this point.
Yeah, it's like you look at the matchup and then you realize it may not even matter. It's not like he's smashing against weak opponents or, struggling only when the box is stacked. Like, it's just this whole offense is just struggling. Volatile, playable, but very risky RB2 if you need. And we got the Cardinals at the Steelers, a homecoming or possibly revenge game, I'm not sure which, for James Conner. He's been a little underwhelming. Does this game get him going?
I mean, it is a good matchup. Steelers' run defense, not very good. But the problem for James Conner has been since Kyler Murray has come back, they've gone from one of the run-heaviest teams to one of the pass-heaviest teams when they're in neutral game scripts. But it's still a good matchup for him. He should get the volume. He shouldn't get game scripted out like last week against the Rams. So given the state that we're in this week with all the buys, I think he's still a decent start.
Right. Like you said, not getting quite as many opportunities and also not getting as many dump offs as he did with Josh Dobbs. His upside is definitely less than it was, but I think he's still a startable RB2 because he gets so many touches and it's not a terrible matchup. So decent RB2 for me in 12-team leagues. And then the Steelers running attack, I mean, which guy do you pick now? Just when Jalen Warren was coming on and became the unofficial starter, or I guess the official starter. Then Najee smashed last week. So who do you like better? Let's start with Najee.
Yeah, I don't even know who I like better, but I think I like them both. So I'm going to say Najee Harris this week against the Cardinals. Not a must start, but the guy you should feel pretty good about having in your lineup this week.
I think you have to. Like you said, they're both looking pretty good, and it's the Cardinals. So I think Najee a solid start. Does the same go for Warren then?
Yeah, I know he let down last week, had that fumble. Didn't look nearly as good as he had the previous weeks, but still, this is pretty much a 1A, 1B situation. It's the Cardinals. Start him if you got him.
The Cardinals defense is starting to look exactly like we expected before the season, so I'm fine rolling out both of these guys. I like Warren a lot. And then the Colts at the Titans. JT, definitely a must start. Derrick Henry, I mean, he did smash last week. I feel like he's going to do it again. I think he's pretty much a must start for me too.
Yeah, it's another good matchup. If there's a worry for me with Derrick Henry, yes, he came through 2 touchdowns against the Panthers. That was great, but still not putting up a big yards, not running for, not ripping off those big runs anymore. Yards per carry is really down, but it's another good matchup against the Colts. So I think Derrick Henry this week is a good start.
And we have the battle of our fandoms. My Dolphins taking on your Commanders. Let's start with the first running back here, Raheem Mostert. How do you feel about him in DC?
I mean, you got to feel good. It's the Commanders. They've been terrible on defense. Pass, run, it doesn't matter. They've just been terrible. We saw last week, he can always rip off a long touchdown. He has touchdown upside. Mostert, I think for the most part, is a must start this week.
Yeah, I'd say only if you have 2 stud running backs ahead of him. But even then, I'm okay flexing Mostert out to get him in my lineup this week. We don't know about Achane yet, but even so, Mostert's going to be the lead back. So for the most part, yeah, you want to roll out Mostert. So what if Devon Achane does play, was held out last week? Obviously, we know the risk, which is what happened 2 weeks ago. Didn't even last a quarter. Are you willing to roll the dice because of this matchup?
I think you have to. I mean, I don't think he's like a must start this week if he plays. Obviously, we know the risk, but the matchup is so good. I mean, just terrible defense here. So I think if he plays, and again, given all the teams on the bye, if he plays, he's still a good start this week.
I'm going to say I'd rather not put him in my lineup. Again, especially this late in the season, you don't want to risk taking an L, getting a 0. I have the feeling even if he plays, it's going to be very limited in terms of touches. We saw Jeff Wilson come on a lot last week. I think they want to keep him fresh for the playoffs, so I'm really going to try not to start Achane unless my other options just really aren't palatable. And then I want to mention Wilson because, like I said last week, 11 carries. What if Achane doesn't play? He's the 1B here. Is it enough because it's the Commanders?
Yeah, I think so. If Achane is completely out, then yeah, I think Jeff Wilson is definitely startable this week. I wouldn't say he's like a good start or a must start, but he's startable.
Yeah, I mean, the floor is not that high because we don't know exactly how involved he'll be. But if Achane doesn't even play, I think Wilson is a decent flex option. Now, what about Brian Robinson? I mean, obviously, this run game is going to have to get going. Can it do that against Miami?
Probably not, because you got to think Miami in this passing attack is going to just put it on the Commanders. But he's been catching passes. He's been scoring touchdowns. It would be very hard for me to bench Brian Robinson this week. So I think this week he's still a solid start.
Agree. I'm really never putting him out of the RB2 range because of his usage, his touchdown upside. I'd feel better if Antonio Gibson was inactive, but he still catches some passes. So I think Brian Robinson's still solid. And then what about Antonio Gibson? I mean, is there a path if they're coming from behind? He catches some passes.
Yeah, that's a path, but that is the only path, and you're really banking on that. And then you're really banking on that they're coming from behind, and he's the one catching passes. I'm not starting Antonio Gibson.
Right. And the question is, will he catch enough passes to be fantasy relevant? And, I mean, he would almost have to score a touchdown. There's probably other guys that have more upside, so he's a desperation streamer. The Broncos taking on the Texans. This is going to be a very interesting game. These teams both now in the playoff hunt. The Broncos on a winning streak. Let's start with Javonte Williams at running back. How do you feel he does at Houston?
Yeah, I'm not feeling as good about Javonte as I was there for a while, because we're starting to see Samaje Perine get involved, and not only get involved near the goal line, taking touchdowns away. Samaje Perine playing the 2-minute drill, but Javonte still gets most of the work here, but just not a lot of upside, so I can only put him in the start him if you need him category.
I feel the same way, and my worry here is with the Texans and this offense. I know the Broncos defense has been much better. It's not like they're going to shut out Houston. I really don't feel that way. I don't know if Javonte will be able to get enough touches to be fantasy relevant, so I'm putting him down kind of like the lower end of the RB3 range. And then what about Samaje Perine? Like you said, actually scored a touchdown last week on the ground, getting more involved. Is he becoming relevant in PPR leagues?
I think he's becoming relevant, and it is a good matchup, but still, you'd have to be very desperate to start Samaje Perine this week. I'm not doing it.
Well, let me just say it would have to be a PPR league because the main appeal here, as I mentioned, is that he's catching passes. Right, he does have a floor. He has some potential to score, but like you said, he's best left as like a flex option if you're just desperate because of the bye weeks. And then in Houston, even though Dameon Pierce was active last week, Devin Singletary was still the guy. Not great results, but are you encouraged more by this matchup?
I mean, you have to be. He still was technically mostly the guy. He caught a bunch of passes too. It's the Broncos. Like, he can't feel great. I mean, it'd be better if he was getting all the work again, but still, in this week with all these buys, I think Devin Singletary is at least a decent start.
I think a decent start is fair, and I mentioned this already, the Broncos defense, you look at the season-long stats, it's terrible against the run, but a lot of that was inflated by that Miami game, but also from early in the season. This defense has been much better. I still think Singletary is playable, but again, I think he's more like RB3, high-end RB3. I don't think he's a must-start. And then what about Dameon Pierce? You think maybe second week back from injury, his usage ticks up enough to make him relevant?
I mean, it'll probably tick up a little bit, but enough to be relevant? Probably not. Even against the Broncos, I'm not starting him.
No, we need to see a lot more usage. And let's remember, before the injury, he was just bad this season. So I think the Texans just roll with Singletary. Pierce, best left on benches or waivers. Panthers taking on the Bucs. New head coach. New/old play caller Thomas Brown again. What does that mean for Chuba Hubbard?
I mean, out of nowhere, Chuba Hubbard with a nice game last week, but this is the Bucs, one of the not the best run defense, but still a very good run defense. It's still the Carolina Panthers. even with all these bye weeks, I can't put Chuba Hubbard in my lineup.
No, I mean, he does have some touchdown potential as we've seen, but I'm just going to keep saying I want to distance myself from this Carolina offense if possible. So he's a desperation streamer, but that's it. And then with Miles Sanders, look, I know he's getting more touches, but I wouldn't start him. If I'm barely starting Chuba, if I need to, I'm not going to start Miles Sanders. I just have to say no.
Exactly. If I'm not starting Chuba, there's no chance I'm starting Miles Sanders.
Now Rachaad White, on the other hand, I'd say he's a pretty good start.
Yeah, it didn't quite boom last week, but this is an even better matchup. I think he does boom this week. I think you got Rachaad White, you keep rolling with him.
Yeah, absolutely. The usage is there. He's been much more efficient, not just as a pass catcher, but as a runner. So, I mean, he's a really high ceiling this week. Gotta love White. Browns taking on the Rams. Let's start with Jerome Ford. What do we make of him in this matchup?
I mean, who knows? Somehow they went into that Broncos game with Dorian Thompson-Robinson, and for the second week in a row, we're like, let's just throw it a ton. Let's not even try to run against this terrible run defense. Now we don't even know who the quarterback's going to be. It's not as good of a matchup. I can't do it. I mean, yeah, you have to be desperate. I can't do it.
Keep feeling like he should get more touches because he's looked good when he gets the ball, but then they keep giving it to Kareem Hunt too and throwing it when they don't need to. So yeah, I mean, I like the talent here, but the opportunity is not enough. I think he's startable, but only if you just don't have a better option. And what about Kareem Hunt? Any different?
You know, I feel even worse about Kareem Hunt. I mean, you either get a touchdown or you get nothing, and you regret ever having him in your lineup. No way am I starting Kareem Hunt.
Yeah, it just continues to aggravate me. Ford has been so much more efficient as a runner, yet Hunt is there basically splitting time with him. So it's touchdown or bust. In the standard league, if you're desperate, that's about it. And then it looks like you should be starting Kyren Williams pretty much without question, even in this tough matchup. What about Royce Freeman? I mean, he actually looks pretty good, got some touches. Is there a path here?
Well, this is a perfect indication of just how bad this Cardinals defense is. Royce Freeman averaged 6 yards per carry on 13 carries and scored a touchdown. Yeah, but this is the Browns now, so no, not starting Royce Freeman.
No, if it was a smash spot, maybe, but even then, you can't rely on a backup running back getting touches and touchdowns and being efficient. It happened last week. It's not going to happen this week. And the 49ers at the Eagles. Let's talk DeAndre Swift. I mean, I don't know. Does the matchup scare you away from him at all?
No, not enough because he's so involved. He catches passes. It's such a good offensive line. I know, he'll get vultured at the goal line by Jalen Hurts, and that's frustrating. But he can also score. He can pick up big chunks of yardage. So I think DeAndre Swift's still a guy you're starting.
Yeah, even if it's not going to be his best game because of the matchup, like you said, that nobody's really taking touches away from him other than his quarterback. The upside is still there. He has a floor as a pass catcher. You got Swift, you're probably just starting him. Chiefs at Packers. Isaiah Pacheco coming off a big fantasy game. Does he repeat in Green Bay?
I'm not sure we see as big a game as the one we just saw, but it's a good matchup against this Packers run defense. They're not very good. We know he can score. Pacheco, another guy I think is a solid start this week.
Yeah, I actually think I like Pacheco more than usual this week because, they're down. McKinnon missed last week, may miss again. Some pass catchers are out. Packers pretty soft against the run, so I think Pacheco is a rock-solid RB2 this week. Now on the Green Bay side, Aaron Jones, well, still week to week. Not sure his status. If he gives it a go this week, can you trust him?
No, you cannot trust Aaron Jones right now. I mean, coming back from what is third or fourth injury this year in a tough matchup against the Chiefs, I don't care if he plays. I'm not starting him.
Completely agree because we've seen it. This is a guy who's got a lot of mileage, had knee issues repeatedly. If he plays, I mean, he has to be more than 100% to be reliable. I know he's far from that. There's no way I'm going to start him. What about A.J. Dillon then? If Jones is out again, would you roll with Dillon?
Nah, I mean, how many times are we going to do this? It needs to be a smash spot, and this isn't it. So even with the volume, I mean, what are you really going to get? I'm not starting him.
He's had smash spots earlier in the season without Jones and didn't smash. So, yeah, I mean, he should be a strong start, but he's not. And then Monday night, we're going to see the Bengals take on the Jaguars. What about Joe Mixon? Definitely not good last week without Burrow. Any better this week?
How can it be better this week? That was a good matchup in a game where it was close. They weren't getting blown out, and he did nothing. If it wasn't for that 30-yard catch with 2 minutes to go, he did literally nothing. Now the Jaguars, a good run defense on the road. Look, you want to start Joe Mixon because he's named Joe Mixon, you do you, but I am not starting him.
I really thought he'd be more involved as a receiver, that would kind of prop up his value last week, and no, I was wrong there. Yeah, and now you got to worry he gets scripted out here with the Jaguars rolling at home, so not completely unstartable. I'd rather go with him over A.J. Dillon, but very risky. All right, now you know which running back should be in or out of your lineup for Week 13. We got you covered at every other position as well. Check out this week's playlist for all the fancy advice that you need.